Well, welcome everyone. I'm Alan Tao, Director of the Electric Vehicle Center at University of Michigan, and very happy to have our last speaker for this year in our Surge webinar series. Really pleased that Professor Jongwoo Lim from Seoul National University agreed to give us a webinar. I actually had the opportunity to see some of his work a few months ago and was very excited at the advances he's making both in battery chemistry and on the battery system. And he'll talk about those advances today. Um, Dr. Lim really is a very well-rounded professor, and you'll see his research goes all the way from fundamental science to real-world applications with a number of companies. And without further ado, I'll be introducing him. The way we run these webinars is we do hold the questions until the end. Feel free to put them in chat, and after Professor Lim finishes his talk, our communications director, Jamie Radcliffe, will moderate the questions as they show up in the chat. So without further ado, Jongwoo, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for having me here, Ellen. And Jamie, thank you so much for making this happen. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, got it. It's okay. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm glad to be here. I woke up a little bit early. This is 6 a.m. in the morning here. I'm so happy to be waking up to meet everyone, to get an opportunity to give a talk. So my title of the talk of today is the lithium-ion battery dynamics, multiscale dynamics, from all the way from the single particles to the cells level. And so I just want to briefly introduce, this is the battery, the cell that we are making. And we want to make sure this works just good. However, if you look into inside, it's made of like bunch of the particles. So I want to give you a brief introduction of what's happening here. So we have aluminum foil on the cathode as a current collectors. We have tons of the cathode particles. And then we have separators. Can you see the cursor? So you can see the cursor, right?
We do not see the cursor.
Oh, you do not see the cursor. Okay. Oh.
Yes, I saw it now, but it.
You see the cursor?
Yeah, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a separator here. So do you see the cursor one more time? So cursor, and then we have an anode in the bottom parts. And what we do here is that we are relying on the crosstalk chemistry between the cathode and anode. We want to we have to make sure the lithium goes through between the cathode and anode. And also, there are so many chemicals are actually flowing from cathode to the anode, to the anode to the cathode. And this is the cell level dynamics we have to think about. And at the same time, there are crosstalk and there's transport within the electrode. There are still tons of particles, and there's still a lot of complicated communication among the cathode particles or among the anode particles. And if you go into more in detail, there are still small little particles we want to make sure it works just fine as it's designed. And there are intra-level transport within each individual particles here. So the length scales are very important to address the specific the phenomena here. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is that we have to really acknowledge the multi-length scale dynamics that this entire cells are facing. So in order to do so, we have to investigate investigate the cell level dynamics and the electron level dynamics, particle level dynamics, and then the atom level dynamics at specific length scale here. So I'm trying to share my recent journey to tackle in each length scale one at a time. So I'm going to start first, tell you what I'm going to investigate in the particle level and or the atom level first. And then I'm going to move on to the electron level and the cell level. So my first question is this. Does the lithium diffuse smoothly within a single crystalline NMC particle? What does it mean by NMC? Is one of the state-of-art cathode particles, nickel, manganese, and cobalt oxide, and they are known to be diffusing smoothly, basically solid solution. So what does it mean, solid solution? So when you talk about diffusion, the gas and liquid, it's all based on the entropy increases. They are trying to increase their distance as much as they can so that they are expanding the volume in this way. And in the diffusion for the gas and liquid, we simply use the Fick's law. And in the undergrad class, we learned the Fick's law. It follows the concentration gradient only. However, in the solid system, when the lithium diffuse within the cathode particle along the channels, they are not only diffused by the concentration gradient, but also they are facing so many strain effects. In fact, the general Fick's law we are teaching in grad school course says that the diffusion is actually driven by chemical potential gradient, not just simply by concentration gradient. There are additional factors, concentration gradient, strain stress level, and mixing entropy, and interfacial energy, and so on. So basically, the diffusion within the solid state has to follow the chemical potential gradient, not just concentration gradient. And now I'm trying to say that one of the question here that yes, the concentration gradient, also strain stress are very important. I'm trying to understand those phenomena. So in order to do so, we developed one of the technique called Picasso. Stands for the primary particle in situ X-ray imaging with the chemical composition analysis and stress strain observation. Basically, what we do is that we shine the X-ray lights to get the lithium concentration map. We shine another hard X-ray and get the diffraction pattern, and we can convert into the three-dimensional strain information in 3D. So basically, we can collect strain information and the lithium concentration information from the same kinds of particle like the Picasso painting does. Basically, we look at from the one side from the Picasso painting to the another side from the Picasso painting. So that's the project that we are excited to share today. So first thing first, we use NMC 111. NMC 111 is well-known solid solution materials, and it's also well-known two-dimensional lithium-ion battery particles like this one. It looks like a platelet particle. So we place this particle and then we shine the X-ray lights in it, and we also make sure these particles are cycled within micro-sized, customized, fabricated battery cells. And then what we do here is that we collect X-ray absorption spectra of the nickel. And those nickel absorption spectra are so sensitive to the nickel oxidation state. So basically what we can get is that we can get the oxidation state of nickel, and that is corresponding to lithium concentration. For example, when the nickel is fully reduced, 2+, that means that they're fully rich lithium. And when the nickel is oxidized all the way to 3.67+, and that actually means the lithium is actually half filled, which is fully charged. And then we rest scan the particle with the focused beam, and then we collect all the data points at the individual energy points. And at the end of the day, what we get is the lithium concentration map. And one of the beautiful thing of this technique is that we are sensing LH of the nickel, which means that we can measure lithium concentration down to 0.1% of the fluctuation because they are so sensitive to the oxidation state map. So, at long story short, we collect the lithium concentration movement in situ. So one good example here is this. This is only like 500 nanometer to 1 micron particles. And the Fick's law says that diffusion should be done within 5 minutes. So diffusion time is 5 minutes. So, and then we are cycling 0.1C dilithiation, 0.1C lithiation. So basically we apply very small current to complete the cycling within 10 hours. So what we expect here is this, lithium has to be gone and gone and gone and gone and gone during the dilithiation process homogeneously, because diffusion time is so fast, 5 minutes. So whenever we see it, the lithium has to be gone and gone and gone, and the lithium concentration within the particle has to be flat, 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 flat. And then during the lithium process, yes, it has to fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up. And however, also we are cycling slow rate. Lithium concentration has to be flat, 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 flat. However, if you look at closely, it's not just simply flat, 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 increasing or decreasing lithium concentration. There's some random fluctuation you can possibly notice from the particle here. There's some yellowish area, there's some green area, there's some brown, the blue area. Of course, if you let it relax for many days, thermodynamics will take care of it. Lithium concentration has to be flat, homogeneously across the particles. However, what we see here is this lithium concentration is basically 95% flat. However, there's a 5% of the lithium fluctuation out there. What's going on? In order to understand these things, I want to assure that this is not a defect associated, this is a stress associated. And what we're trying to say here is this: maybe the lithium deficient area is actually expanding the c-axis. Lithium, the rich area is actually clumping the c-axis. This is actually thermodynamically well known for the NMC particles here. So we are trying to get those kind of images from this particle. However, we are only looking at lithium concentration at this moment. We are not looking at c-axis or the lattice expansion or shrinkage strain information yet this point. So what we develop is a Bragg coherent X-ray diffraction images. So we try to do coherent X-rays and to get the diffraction pattern. And if you get the diffraction pattern, there's many features in there. If you reconstruct those features, now what we can do is we can get strain three-dimensional information in situ. So based on the diffraction pattern, which has all the information of the strain information, and then we can inverse Fourier transform, basically to take the inverse Fourier transform and then get the reconstruction, and you can get strain map 3D. This is one of the recent paper we published about like 2 years ago. And what we do here is this: as a synthesized particle, we annihilate 800 degrees, making sure that everything is so flat. Lithium concentration is so homogeneous. And this is one of the particle we cycle. We fully discharge, fully lithiate them electrochemically. And then, however, there still has a little bit of lithium fluctuation, maybe like 5% of the fluctuation. This is something that is almost inevitable, as I mentioned before. As a synthesized particle, we don't see any strain information. We don't see any strain fluctuation at all. It's all flat. However, those kind of fluctuated lithium distribution then results in the Bragg coherent diffraction imagings that there's a 5.5% of the strain fluctuation out there. So basically, long story short, I'm trying to convince you that lithium diffusion is fluctuated and also associated with the fluctuated strain information, strain distribution at the same time. And this is a highly reproducible. And then, although I didn't have time to show you, we have the phase field model that explains that 0.5% of the strain is actually compensating 5% of the lithium concentration fluctuation to equalize chemical potential flat. So long story short, does the lithium diffuse smoothly within single crystalline NMC particle, which is known to be solid solution with the lithium? Answer is that lithium is often clumped and diluted that can even diffuse against the concentration gradients. And those fluctuation in the lithium concentration gradient is associated with the internal stress. And then now I want to highlight that diffusion is not only driven by the concentration gradient, but also strain stress and many other factors. So this is one of the curveball that the batteries throw to you, because 99% of the papers, we always assume lithium concentration is the major driving force of the diffusion. Yes, maybe it's one of the major driving force, but we have to consider strain stress information at the same time, because they also drives the lithium concentration too. So this is the first part. And then I'm going to talk about second curveball that the battery throw to you, within the electrode level, basically along this electrode level. So interparticle diffusion, interparticle crosstalk within the electrode, there are tons of particles. So my second question is this. If you have more battery particle in the electrode, of course, there'll be more gas evolution. Always more gas evolution, more gas evolution. Then my second question here is this. Does the distance between the battery particle matters for the gas evolution? So simple experiment we have to take this. We include lithium-6 cobalt 04, which is one of the state-of-art sacrificial the cathode. Basically, they produce a lot of lithium and also oxygen. The reason we put a lot of sacrificial or over-lithiated cathode here is that because the anode, their Coulomb efficiency is not 100%. They lose a lot of lithium. So that they actually intentionally put a lot of lithium in the cathode particle, and they release the lithium to the anode, and then they just sacrifice itself, and then they're not active anymore in the second cycles. That's the main reason they use the sacrificial over-lithiated cathode particle in the cathode materials. But we are investigating as an oxygen source because they also evolve the oxygen at the same time. So my second question here is this. Does the distance matter between the oxygen evolving lithium-rich cathode particles? If I make it homogeneously, or I can make a concentrated distribution at the separator, or concentrated distribution at the current collectors. In three cases, which one gives more oxygen gases? In principle, the amount of the lithium cobalt oxide here I'm putting here is exactly the same. But although their absolute amount is the same, depending on the distance, which one is going to produce more oxygen gases. Long story short, simple blend produces less oxygen. However, double layer, whichever doesn't matter. Doesn't close to cathode, close to the separator, or close to the current collector, it doesn't really matter. As long as they're clumped together, they are like they're double layer made. They produce 4 to 5 times more oxygen gases compared to homogeneously distributed electrode. And this is interesting. Why? I put the same amount of the oxygen evolving gases, oxygen evolving gas materials. Why does it produce more and more gases when they are concentrated? But if you look at the CO2, their CO2 level is about the same. Doesn't really matter how the distance between the cathode, the oxygen evolving gas materials. So the CO2 is not affected. However, oxygen is strongly affected by the geometry of the cathode particle loading itself. So in order to answer to this, we systematically increase the sacrificial cathode particle from 3% to all the way to 100%. And then what we observe is this actually follows a quadratic equation. Of course, it gives more oxygen gases. However, they follow the quadratic relationship, if you look at this part. And if you come back, the mechanism of the oxygen gas evolution is actually, in order for the oxygen gas to evolve, we need a single oxygen coming out from the lattices, and then another single oxygen coming out from the lattices. And those single oxygens are so unstable. In order to produce the regular triplet oxygen gases, they have to collide together. They have to collide. And then they become 2 triplet oxygen gases. So in order to make sure we evolve the triplet 2 oxygen gases, it requires 2 single oxygen gases evolution. So if you come back to the general chemistry, 2 collision reaction process means you need a quadratic relationship for the kinetic relationship. That's why the oxygen gas evolution is quadratic equation. However, CO2 is not necessarily, because we only need one single oxygen that react with a bunch of the electrolyte, continuous level of electrolyte. In this way, we only need one single oxygen gases to produce CO2. That's why we are following the quadratic relationship for the O2, But however, we are only following the linear relationship for the CO2. So second answer to the second question, the more particle loading, more gas evolution for sure. However, does the interparticle distance also matter? Yes, it matters, especially for the O2 evolution, because it follows the quadratic relationship of the O2 for the O2 evolution. However, not for CO2, because it follows a linear relationship with the single oxygen to produce the CO2. Simply, the more the single oxygen, the more CO2. So now I'm going to the third questions. Since I mentioned about the gas evolution, I'm trying to answer you, those gas evolving can cross talk between the cathode and the anode in the cell level. So I'm trying to investigate cell level crosstalk between the cathode and anode. And as answer to do this, I'm trying to introduce two different topics really quickly. One is the calendar aging, and second is the thermal runaway. And one is the first calendar aging I'm going to talk about here. And I have two more questions within the thermal calendar aging. So how does the cell degrade during the calendar aging? And how important is the crosstalk during the calendar aging? So this is a collaboration with the LG Energy Solution, one of the leading company in the battery manufacturing. They provide me two types of the cells, which contains NMC622, NMC811. Doesn't really matter how many lithium, how many nickel contents we have. They always get better health and retention when they store the batteries at SOC 100% compared to SOC 70%. This is counterintuitive because we know when you first buy the Tesla, they always advise you to not to store your battery's car at 100% full charge. However, it's highly reproducible. It's a widely well-known phenomenon, actually, that the 100% storage is actually gives better cycle life than or calendar life compared to SOC 70% storage. This is counterintuitive, but it is true. It's a case. And then the LG and the solution came to me about, oh, can you please try to answer to what's happening here? So we look into here. SOC 100% for the SOC 70% for the cathode, their voltage is highly different. SOC 100%, their voltage is 4.3. SOC 70% is the voltage 4.0. As a result, SOC 100% cathode produced a lot more CO2 gases than the SOC 70%. On the other hand, on the anode side, their voltage is not that much different because there's a strong plateau out there. So there's anodic evolution gases, the ethylene gases, they're actually only at three times. It's not like 10 times. So we know that cathode degrades way much more severely at the SOC 100% compared to SOC 70%. That's fact. We are not denying that part. However, you got to take a look at the degradation mechanism during the calendar aging, which is an inventory loss. So all the lithiums are now stored in the anode during the calendar aging, and those lithium want to react with the electrolyte, producing SCR. And those SCR is actually a fingerprint of irreversible inventory loss of lithium. This is a major enemy. But when the cathodes are degraded, they have to remove the oxygen from the cathode, react with the ethylene carbonate, one for example, and has to produce a CO2. And those CO2 will crosstalk to the anode, will diffuse to the anode for the calendar aging, or at the 60 degrees Celsius of a little bit heated environment. And this is one of the specs in that the OEM requires to the cell makers. And those CO2 will distract the lithium. It will react with the lithium in the anode and then producing lithium oxalate. And those distractions actually mitigate SCR formation because we have two pathways for the lithium. One is reacting to electrolyte or reacting with the CO2, which is more oxidizing. And then those oxalates come back to the cathode and then safely retrieving the lithium to the cathode so that it prevents the inventory loss of the lithium from the anode side. And those CO2 is now become recycled and now becoming a redox shuttle. So basically, if the cathode is degraded and producing more CO2, and it actually triggered self-discharging, which in turn suppress the lithium inventory loss. And how do I prove what's going to happen if we lose the lithium? So this is the cathode and anode half cell. And in the full cell now, this is the cathode particle delithiated, anodes are lithiated, and when at the fully charged, lithiums are cathodes are fully lithiated and anodes are fully delithiated at the end of the discharge. This is a fresh cell, and this is something that we cycle back and forth. And cutoff voltage we require the 3.0 at the discharge cutoff, 4.25 at the discharge charge cutoff. This is something that this is the full cell cycling. However, if the cell lost the lithium as inventory loss, the anode lithium concentration will decrease. And then it's okay, it's 4.25 volt, it's fine. However, at the end of the discharge, the lithium has to go all the way to up. And then the cutoff voltage has to be 2.5 volt. However, we are cycling 3.0 volt as a discharge cutoff. So what's going to really happen here is this. So now, because we are losing a lot of lithium in the anode, as a result, we cannot utilize the low voltage region of the cathode. And this is what we call the balance shift. The rule here is this: because we lost the lithium in the anode, we cannot discharge fully the cathode. And this is what we call the balance shift. And how can I prove this kind of balance shift? Very difficult. But if you introduce in situ XRD, they prove specifically SOC on the cathode and anode at the same time. Now you can diagnose inventory loss and cathode and anode within the full cell without dismantling the full cell. So this is the in situ result, in situ XRD result of the anode within the full cell. After we storage them, we just make sure that we cycle it 100%, charge and discharge, 100 charge and discharge. This is the BOL, beginning of the life. This is the fully charged lithium-rich graphite, and this is the bottom part is a fully dilithiated discharged cathode. This is the beginning of life cycle. However, if you age them at SOC 70% for 12 weeks, and then now we cycle the batteries after storage, 100% cycle charge and discharge, you will see they are not using lithium-rich stage 1 lithium-rich graphite. However, so we have to look at for this part at the end of the charge. So, however, if you store it at SOC 100%, and then now you're cycling it, now you can see here that they are utilizing a lot of lithium-rich graphite, which means, so if you come back to here, so beginning of the BOL, at the end of the fully charged, the graphite is fully lithiated. And SOC 100% storage one, the anode, also utilizing fully lithiated anode. However, SOC 70% one, they are not reaching fully lithiated graphite because as you can see, their peak is very much weaker. Now you're looking at the end of the discharge. BOL utilize the last at stage 4, the dilithiated graphite. However, SOC 70%, you can see strong peak. They're utilizing fully dilithiated graphite. However, SOC 100% one anode, they are not utilizing SOC 100%, the fully dilithiated graphite. So if I can plot it here, BOL not using high voltage, but SOC 70% one, the one they store SOC 70%, they're utilizing fully dilithiated graphite. So this is the balance shift. This is one of the example represented the figure, the balance shift geometry based on XRD, in situ XRD, cycling in situ XRD. Okay, now I'm going back to the cathode particle. Within the full cell, I'm looking at in situ XRD in the cathode part. I'm just from the same cell, okay? After storage, we said cycling 100%, making sure where are we? Long story short, at the end of the discharge, the red color is the cathode particle as SOC 70%. After the SOC 70% storage, they are not reaching fully discharged state, which means because the anode are using high voltages, the cathode cannot use this entire cycle. And this is exactly what we expect from my previous the cartoon. And one more thing, the cathodes are actually degraded when they are stored at SOC 100%. As you can see, the C-axis here is actually collapsed here. So the long story short, how does the cell degrade during the calendar aging? Anode lithium loss and cathode degradation occurs simultaneously. However, lithium inventory loss is the dominant failure mode. And how does the crosstalk happen? When the cathode degrades, it will generate CO2, and then CO2 will crosstalk to the anode that can mitigate the lithium loss. And we propose CO2 oxide coupling is one of the major factors that suppress the parasitic inventory loss side reactions. Now I'm going to spend like 5 more minutes to explain the thermal runaway. So now I convinced you that crosstalk is very important at 60 degrees, but now I'm increasing higher temperature, which is thermal runaway. And then crosstalk is going to be way much more important than any other scenarios. I'm trying to answer how important those crosstalk during the thermal runaway. Previously, we always thought that oxygen gas evolution from the cathode is a major crosstalk phenomenon. However, that single transport crosstalk, unidirectional crosstalk, is not sufficient to explain whatever we see in the real life in the fire accident of the batteries. We definitely need additional the factors that explains detrimental explosive fire hazard. And that's why I propose this hypothesis. It's not a simple one-dimensional, one-directional crosstalk. It's got to be additional crosstalk. Maybe anode side also crosstalk to the cathode. And then cathode side cross to the anode. And then anode side cross to the cathode. They're going to be self-amplifying multi-directional crosstalk that can only explain this severe thermal runaway effect. Without those, it's very difficult to explain whatever we see in the real life. So in order to address this question, we also investigate gas analysis, in situ XRD analysis, and heat analysis. And basically, the simple logic here is this. We investigate cathode-only thermal runaway. We investigate anode-only thermal runaway. We investigate full cell thermal runaway. The addition of the cathode-only and anode-only cannot explain the full set thermal runaway. That means there going to be additional synergistic effect, which is the crosstalk. So this is something that the logic we have. So there's no such tool to investigate in situ. So we have to develop the full cell in situ XRD, full cell heat analysis, and so on. So long story short, the blue curve is the thermal runaway heat analysis in the cathode only. The green curve is the thermal runaway heat analysis of the anode only. And then the red color is the thermal runaway analysis of full cell. So the simple mind says that, okay, you got to add the cathode only, anode only to explain the full cell. However, you can see there are additional features that cannot be explained by the simple addition of the full cell, or simple addition of the anode and cathode. It means there are going to be additional crosstalk or synergistic effect. So in order to answer this whole things, we investigate in situ XRD gas analysis. Although due to the time limit, I'm not going to go over all the details here. So basically, if you investigate heat, gas, in situ XRD, what you can say is yes, at the low temperature, SEI will produce a lot of ethylene gases, and they will come to the cathode, and they will attack the CI of the cathode and produce the CO2 at the very low temperature. And as a result, okay, I'm not going to go over to all the details here. And then those oxygen gases will produce more CO2 by meeting with the ethylene gases from the anode at the mid-temperature crosstalk. So one good example here is this. In the anode only, you will see a lot of ethylene gases here. Anode only. However, you see less ethylene gas in the full cell. However, you see more CO2 gases, which means the full cell, those ethylene gases are consumed by the cathode, producing the more CO2 gases and producing less ethylene gases in the full cell. So basically, something is consumed. And then we can rationalize those phenomena in this cartoon here. And now I'm increasing the higher temperature and then looking at the cathode. So cathode only, yes, it will produce oxygen gases. However, not at the low temperature, only at the very high temperature. And the anode will produce ethylene gases at the low temperatures, but it will produce ethylene gases at the control level. However, if you put them all together, it will they're gonna kill each other. Just produce ethylene, produce CO2, produce ethylene, produce it. They're attacking each other, which basically amplifying multi-directional crosstalk is happening right there. And why do we care? Because at the end of the day, we have a lot of CO2. And those CO2, we thought they are fire extinguisher gas. However, CO2 is not a fire extinguisher gas in the battery cells, because when the CO2 is produced, it will attack the lithium in the anode, producing lithium carbonate. And lithium carbonate is highly ionic materials, which means their lattice entropy is so high, which means the lithium and oxygen or lithium and CO2 and lithium carbonate formation reaction has an extremely high exothermic reaction entropy, minus 1,500 kilojoule per mole. In the anode only, those lithium carbonate is not well seen until the very high temperature. However, in the full cell, we start to see lithium carbonate formation at a very low temperature. That means we have a very strong lithium carbonate formation that produces a lot more heat than we expected. So fire extinguisher gas CO2 is actually a bad thing in the battery, in the thermal runaway. So how can I mitigate it? One simple rule. So now we learned that high temperature CO2 from the cathode to the anode is a bad thing. So we simply overcoat the anode with the aluminum oxide that can prevent CO2 penetration from the cathode to the anode, so that it can prevent formation of the lithium and CO2, lithium carbonate. By doing so, yes, we are not able to mitigate the low temperature the thermal runaway. However, we can safely, very effectively mitigate high temperature part of the thermal runaway mechanism, where the CO2 gas attack the lithium in the anode. And this is a collaboration with the Professor Won-Baek Kim, because he produced the aluminum oxide coated graphite here. So, answer to the question, how important the crosstalk? They're very important. Multi-directional self-amplifying crosstalk is there. At the low temperature, ethylene gas produced from the anode that attacks the CO2, attack the cathode, produces CO2, and then also they attack the anode. At the very high temperature, we got a lot of CO2 from the cathode, and they attack the lithium inside the anode. In order to mitigate it, we simply just overcoat the anode with the artificial SCR, which is, for example, aluminum oxide, so that we can suppress high temperature thermal runaway very effectively. So I want to just have one slide to summarize my work. So we investigate individual particle level, that the lithium diffusion is not simple smoothly. There's always a stress transformation. In the electro level, interparticle communication matters for the gas evolution. In the cell level, cathode and anode, they are communicating even more, complicating calendar aging and more make the thermal runaway more severely. I'd like to acknowledge my students and team members, and also the calendar aging was in the collaboration LG Energy Solution. Thermal runaway was in collaboration Samsung SDI, and for two top and also electric gas evolution also collaborated with LG Energy Solution. Single particle imaging was funded by the NRF government. And then thank you so much for your time and attention, and thank you so much. Okay, now I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jongwoo. A lot of virtual applause, but we'll have Jamie now moderate the questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions for Jongwoo, please enter them in the chat.
So it's not unusual as the session chair to take advantage of the first question. So
What are you looking
Jongwoo,
at?
Nerd.
Nerd?
EV stuff.
yeah, I'm sorry, Jongwoo. The alumina coating has also been shown to just slow down capacity degradation. Do you think it's associated with, I've always seen that as an SEI phenomenon, but do you think this could be playing in just early capacity degradation?
Oh, so if I interpret your question, so the artificial aluminum oxide does have a side effect, for example, capacity loss in the beginning. Maybe.
Well, it
So
actually will
this is
reduce, but it'll reduce the degradation in early cycling.
Oh,
And
I
so
see. I see.
I'm just wondering, I've always thought of it as an SEI phenomenon. This is I wonder if this would play in early low temperature cycling.
Only low temperature cycling. Let me think. Not during the thermal runaway, during the cycling, right?
Yeah.
I think so. We haven't checked the low temperature yet, but we only checked the room temperature cycling. And the aluminum oxide, surprisingly, if you control the thickness very, very carefully, it actually helps capacity and also kinetics. That's very interesting. The reason we have is because of these additional barriers. However, it's a hypothesis. It makes very friendly SCIs. And we know that the kinetics and cycling is depending on the SCI formation. Now, what we found interestingly, very thin aluminum oxide is not impeding lithium transport depth significantly. However, it helps forming favorable SCIs. It's even better in the cycling performance in the very early cycle, actually. That's a very interesting phenomenon we found. And we don't know the reason here that is this. So actually, yes, the capacity is actually not actually get better, actually, interestingly.
Yeah, we found the same thing, but also struggling with the explanation. So
yeah. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Jongwoo, you can stop sharing your screen if you like, just so we can see you better. We have a comment and question from Mohammed. He says, excellent talk. Did you look at using XPS analysis for SEI or confirming changes in cathode and anode in aging studies?
Okay, so so probably aging studies, maybe he or she talk about the calendar aging part, right? Calendar aging part. We have checked it. Yes, we make sure that we use the XPS to making sure that the anode has a during the calendar aging. So the SCI is actually they're very, very similar, because in the XPS, the level that you can see is basically the similar the composition of the SCI, very top layers. But after the calendar aging, the SCI became really, really thick. So in the XPS, simple XPS experiment, you don't see the big difference between SOC 70%, SOC 100%. That's why we had to investigate bulk level lithium and also so on. So yes, we use XPS all the time, but if I can use a little bit more moment to explain additional surface analysis, we use TEY analysis, total electron yield analysis in the synchrotron. So which is also very similar to XPS. However, it used not only photoelectron, but also OZ electron, then produce the total electron yield, very highly surface sensitive and very reproducible work. And it's called TEY. And this is one of the very friendly technique me and myself and my lab love to use as a complementary analysis in addition to XPS. Okay, hopefully, I hope that this is it.
Thank you. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Well, again, Professor Lim, I want to thank you so much for talking to us today. I do see the question. Yes, we do record these, and they're available through our website. So once again, let's do a virtual applause as if we were in person. And so I'd like to thank everybody who's been attending our webinars throughout the year. This is obviously our last one in December. And so I wish everybody a happy holiday and a great and happy and prosperous new year. And stay tuned for our first webinar of 2026. So thank you, everybody.